Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar. This is Christina from Sona. For those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. We are the AI native workforce management solution for hospitality operators, where consumer-grade design is matched by AI-driven decision-making. We work with customers like Popeyes, LGH, Dakota Hotel, Hearts Group, the Belfry, Glen Eagles, and more. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Hopefully, it's going to be a really interesting topic. So please feel free to use the chat function available to everyone. Ask questions as we go through the topics. I know Ben and Alan are going to keep an eye on it. Sona team will also be present in the chat. So again, any questions, we're here to answer them. And this webinar is going to be recorded and you will receive the recording afterwards. Finally, have to add all views expressed in today's webinar and presentation reflect only the speaker's views and not those of the wider team or their employer and organization. Now, with the boring bits out of the way, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Ben Disson to do a quick introduction.
Hey, so yeah, great to be here. Super excited. I'm Ben. I'm one of the founders of Sona. I run the sort of tech and product side of the business. I spend, my wife would say, far too much time thinking about what role AI can play in sort of workforce management. I think these are always most interesting if they become more interactive. So super keen. People, please use the chat to sort of interject and nudge us in directions that are interesting for you. Alan, super exciting, so excited and grateful to have you here. Would you like to give us a quick introduction, both to yourself and UK Hospitality?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for inviting me. And Ben, thank you for speaking at the UK Hospitality Conference 3 weeks ago, I think it is now. You had one of our highest audience ratings, so I'm glad to return the favour. Hello everyone, I'm Alan Simpson. I am the brand new Chief Executive of UK Hospitality. UK Hospitality, for those of you who don't know, is the trade association, represents the breadth of hospitality, whether that's restaurants, bars and pubs, cafes, hotels, or tourism venues like sort of big theme parks and contract catering. My own background is I was in banking for many years, then I went and ran the London Economic Development Agency, London and Partners, and I joined UK Hospitality as the Deputy CEO last year.
Super exciting. I guess like both people in the audience and Alan yourself, I'd love to sort of, AI is this term that gets thrown around quite a lot. I'd love to get your sort of, you have a lot of very interesting conversations with a lot of very interesting people. We'd love to get sort of your thoughts and the audience's thoughts on when we talk about AI in hospitality, sort of what jumps out, like what are the themes, what are the topics that are front of mind?
Well, I think it's a really interesting thing is that AI is one of those words which is misused. You talk about this a lot. We use AI to mean data often. We mix up AI and machine learning, and you can sell products by claiming they're AI when they're not. I think the thing about hospitality is that in some ways it's been quite a late adopter of some of this technology, certainly in parts of hospitality. And the reason for that, I think, is that you go into hospitality because you like people, and there's a tendency to think that the solution to most problems is more people, isn't it? And we'll talk a bit about how that differs from, say, retail. But you look to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you work in hospitality, most things look like an opportunity for a people-based solution. And the work, Ben, that you and your colleagues are doing to move the way that people think about AI away from being how do you innovate out people, and actually how do you innovate to deploy people more effectively, is exactly the journey I think the sector's going on.
Yeah, that resonates a lot, because I think that sort of it's very easy to talk about. You talk about the things that AI can do. It's maybe worth touching on that misusing, but you talk about the things that AI can do, and they maybe hear a lot of things that sound a bit like what they're doing as a day job. I think a natural point there is for people to be a bit frightened and say, oh, well, what does that mean for me? What does that mean for sort of myself and the people in my business? And I think like the thing I keep coming back to is that I think the things that AI are going to do aren't going to be the things that people are currently doing. They're going to be things that you wish they were doing and they wish they were doing, but they just didn't have time. I think like an area that we see a lot of people talking about is lots of people have an awful lot of dashboards, 30, 40, 50 different dashboards for labor, for stock, for everything you can imagine. And you look at the usage stats for those, and you can see that when someone's making an operational decision, we'd love people to have time to go and look at 30 dashboards every time, but we know that they don't. We know that actually they're not making use of that information. And what AI is going to do is go and look at those dashboards for you and tell you, oh, there is one thing that matters. That's normally what happens, right? You look at 30 different dashboards and one of them has something that you needed on it. And what the AI can do is go and tell you what that one thing was, so you don't have to look at them. But again, it's not replacing something you currently do. It's sort of augmenting it and allowing you to do extra things so that you can go back and spend time focusing on guest experience, or focus on those things in hospitality that make the bit that's about people.
Yeah, and quite often the person who owns one dashboard and the person who owns another dashboard are different people. And the insight may be from reading both dashboards together and realizing there's a truth here which relates to this and vice versa. But because it's two different people doing it, actually those two dashboards are never interrogated together. And of course, what AI can do is to identify the insights which come from looking at more than one data set together. And humans are very good at that. One of the things that the human mind does very well is see those sort of lateral correlations. But actually, in practice, when you've got a busy restaurant or a busy pub, or you're trying to get the schedule for next week done, how often do we sit down and interrogate those dashboards properly? I'll bet that a lot of my members, they come to look at the dashboard, or sometimes even make sure the dashboard is up to date for the first time when they have their investor meeting coming up, and they need to make sure that it's all in hand. And it becomes more like homework than an active commercial decision-making driver.
I think also that the bit there that's so important is like that also tends to be after the fact. Like it's when your investors are there, or when you talk to your investors, or when you realize something's gone wrong. Sort of when you get an area manager going to GM and saying, hey, your payroll was like up 20%, or your labor percentage was up to this. And then retroactively you go and look and say, well, what went wrong? And you say, well, we had a bad Tuesday, so we pulled out some labor, and that meant we had a bad Friday and Saturday. But that's too late. You've already lost those. You lost those sales. You've potentially delivered a poor experience. And it's like, how do we shift it back so that at the time somebody was making that suboptimal decision, it was being surfaced then when it's still time to do something about it?
Yeah, I think that's right. The other thing is, of course, that people are very bad. I said the human mind is quite good at sort of seeing correlations between sort of parallel data sets. What the human mind is quite bad at is predicting the future. We're very bad at this. Normally, when we say to ourselves, well, we think tomorrow is going to look like this, what you're saying is what you think about today. Risk is the classic example. It would be very easy to invest in the stock market if you could predict next week's risk. If you ask somebody what they think about next week's risk, they'll tell you how much risk they're feeling today, but they'll couch it in tomorrow's language. One of the things that having systems which look at data systematically and crucially have learned from other people's data sets as well in ways that means that they understand correlations is that they can see exponents earlier, and they can start say, well, look, when data start to look like this, quite often in 6 months' time, the data looks like this. And the change curve may be sufficiently small that the human mind struggles to see it, but a machine can say, okay, well, look, you are at the start of an exponent here. So it's really about being additional to the way that the human mind works rather than substituting it or stripping it out.
And I really like that, actually. I'm going to steal that phrase, that thing about being additional to how the human mind works, because I feel like it's almost my much less technical way of putting it to lots of people is almost like giving people superpowers, because there are just some things, like we see it with forecasting a lot, that if you ask someone to forecast what will revenue be on a Wednesday, we get some really interesting data on sentiment from people in terms of how their last few days and their last few shifts have been. And what they're really telling you about was how good their last 48 hours were. They'll forecast up when they've had a good couple of days, and they'll forecast down when they've had a bad couple of days. And the machine's very good at taking a step back and saying, sure, but if you look at this, we may be feeling bad about the week because, a staff member left yesterday, but the last 3 Wednesdays were £10,000 days. There is no reason to think that it's suddenly going to be an £8,000 day. And it can sort of, it's not overruling the manager, it's not taking away their autonomy, but it is giving them the ability to zoom out a little bit and say, hey, why, just check your thought process a little bit there in terms of what led you to that. And it can coach them to be better and better and better.
It challenges the recency bias, doesn't it?
Exactly this. And it also means, like, I think, like, some people here will have heard me say it before, I feel like there's lots of really great tech out there. Like, and the last 10 years have been amazing in hospitality. They went from being, I think it was quite hard to add intelligence in 10 years ago in hospitality, because in machine intelligence, that is, because there wasn't that much structured data. Like, the systems were quite basic. And now increasingly you have reservation systems, you have information delivery systems, you have kitchen management, you have POS systems that are keeping much more accurate data on exactly when transactions happened and all of this sort of thing. And all these systems are great, but every time we add another one in, it does feel like you pull people to the back office a little bit more. You're asking every new system is a little bit more time spent in front of an iPad or in front of a computer in the back room or whatever that might be. And every minute that you spend there is time that you didn't spend coaching team members or talking to guests or looking at what the experience of people in a venue is and saying, oh, this doesn't look quite right. And I feel like I think agentic AI is the first piece of technology where the outcome of using it is that you spend less time looking at a computer. I think that's almost quite exciting, that we can take all the benefits of the data and the systems of the last 10 years and then say, well, how can humans spend less time staring at screens and more time doing these things that make hospitality businesses great?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. And, you know, we've talked before, haven't we, about the fundamental difference between retail and hospitality, which is that generally most retail is conducted in the UK in quite a transactional way. You go in, you scan through a till, and you leave. You take your meal deal. I am, by the way, in a very data-led way, obsessed with winning the meal deal. You know, I don't choose the 3 items I want. I maximize how much I've won. So I will buy the triple egg sandwich, even though I don't like it. I'll have the naked smoothie because it's 40p more expensive than the innocent smoothie. And I will have the extra large hula hoops because they're 5p more, and I have one. But it's a very transactional relationship often with that process. Now, there are some retail where that's not true. So if you go to Fortnum and Mason's, you pay a premium, although actually quality for quality, it's reasonably stable pricing. But you pay a premium for the experience of being at Fortnum's. And I remember taking my daughter to Fortnum's at Christmas one year, and she was wandering around thinking it was amazing. And one of the chaps in the red outfits appeared next to her in downstairs in the food hall because he'd seen her marveling at a sweet in the sweets bit on the ground floor, and he'd followed us down with the chocolate. Right, so it's not always true, but retail generally is much more transactional than hospitality. So it's been first on the high street in trying to use technology to automate out people cost in the front office. So, you know, reducing the number of people you need to change over the prices on the food items in the aisles, tills, automating, and so on. Like, because people don't mind that experience being automated. Hospitality, it doesn't work in the same way. I live in South London, and there were 2 cocktail bars next to one another in Peckham. There was a place called Funky Dory, which was a really cool cocktail bar where they made their own bitters, they fat washed their own bourbon, you know, they'd be setting fire to some lavender next to your glass and all the rest of it. And it's about £10 a cocktail, I think. Not expensive compared to the West End, but it's about £10. Next door to it, there was a really innovative place called Can Bar, which had a sort of a Londi's style fridge. Yeah. And you went and you got your pre-batch, very high quality pre-batch cocktail, scan it at the till, and then sit down, and there was somebody kind of reading their book, kind of vaguely manning the shop, but not really. It was about £7 for a cocktail. that didn't work. It closed. So it turns out that hospitality, and the cocktails are about the same quality. Turns out people will pay at least £3 in margin, in added cost, to have the hospitality experience over the automated experience. Now, I don't know, there'll be a point at which the other place is so expensive or that place is so cheap that people might transfer. But it turns out that our behavioral elasticity in hospitality is very different to retail.
Yeah.
I think the lesson that you've shared so often, Ben, is that actually you don't use tech to innovate out the hospitality. You use tech to work out how you can deliver it more efficiently, but also how you can target it better.
I love the targeting. Sorry, please finish. But the targeting point, I think, is a great shout there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I suppose I made my point really, but it's recognizing that hospitality is a different use case to retail. They may be on the high street to a certain extent. They may be the retail bit of a manufacturing supply chain out to experiential. In some ways they look very similar, but they're not. And the way that hospitality creates value, which is an additional to retail, given that you can buy a bottle of Spitfire in a supermarket for £1.90 and it's probably £5 in the pub. How is that? Why will the consumer think that? Well, it's whatever that is, it isn't automatable, because if it were, you'd just go to the supermarket.
I completely this, and I think that like the other trend, I think, over the last sort of particularly most of the last 10 years, I think, is that like it's very easy to think sort of quite obsessively about cost, because cost is this thing that obviously, I mean, costs are going up, very important thing, but it's very easy to measure. It's very easy to understand that we're spending more on labor, that with every time we add labor, something becomes more expensive. The cost of the business goes up. And it's very hard to measure what that does to the experience. But that whole intangible place that meant that the cocktail bar that did have the people, that did have the experience, stayed open while the other one didn't, was all down to how you targeted those people. It was all down to having a workforce that were focused on just the bit of the experience that meant that in the end, when you were standing next to those two places, and you said, no, I want someone setting fire to lavender next to my cocktail rather than going into a fridge. And I feel like that's where traditional systems, and the machine learning AI distinction here, I think, is quite important. Traditional systems, they're very good at like forecasting lines and saying, this is how much, if you do this much, your costs will be this, and therefore your margin will be this. They're very bad at understanding the subtleties of what are you missing out on. They're very bad at understanding, for example, that a metric I've been looking at a lot with a pub group recently is rate of drink sales. And legacy machine learning systems love it when people are operating at an incredibly high rate of sales, when you have people that are pulling pints or making cocktails as quickly as humanly possible. And they will consistently tell you that you're doing a very, very good job if you have people operating at this very, very rapid rate and this very, very efficient rate of pulling pints, making cocktails, whatever it might be. And they completely miss out on the fact that if people are operating at this very, very sustained rate for a very long time, you're probably delivering a terrible service quality, because you've probably got a 4-deep queue at the bar, or you've got people waiting at tables for 15 minutes. And the models just see efficiency going up and they try and optimize for it. And what the agentic bit is very good at doing is you pointed at these outputs from machine learning systems, and pretty much the first thing they'll come back with is, you were actually definitely understaffed there. It looks very efficient. Your labor percentage looks very, very good.
Yeah.
You're almost certainly delivering a terrible experience. You've almost definitely got people walking away who won't come back today or on a future day. And you probably left 20% of your potential sales behind. So you'd have been much better off sacrificing a little bit of labor percentage there for much higher sales. And I think that type of nuance has been very hard to capture in the past. And it's very hard to capture with traditional models. But if you combine the traditional models with the agentic piece, you start to be able to balance that equation a bit more and say, yes, cost is still very, very important. But in the end, if you have to choose between cutting cost and growing top line, you're probably better off in the current climate, like growing top line or focusing on using labor as a tool to drive top line as much as you are trying to cut it. And I think that's a kind of an exciting shift.
Yeah, it's such an interesting point that the margin that you can acquire in hospitality is so behaviorally elastic, and you can bake in new ways of, so long as the experience is there, people will pay marginal extras for the experience. What they will be much less willing to do is to accept margin. So to take your example, let's assume, you know, all of those pubs absolutely rammed. They've maximized the efficiency of the people and the pump and the beer. You know, the beer is only on site for a very brief period of time because it goes. It's all very efficient. You can keep your costs down. Actually, there's this really weird thing which economists don't like. This feels so. Hospitality as a sector makes no sense to economists. For a number of reasons, but there's this really interesting thing, which is that you can lose customers by reducing the quality of the hospitality but making savings far more quickly actually than you gain them with a rise. So my daughter got a 9-year-old. After football on a Saturday, she wants a Happy Meal. The 9-year-old's mind cannot conceive of anything more exciting than a Happy Meal, right? That's not price sensitivity. She doesn't know it's cheaper than going to the pub for a pub lunch. From her perspective, it comes in a red box. It's got a toy in it. She vaguely suspects she shouldn't be eating the burger, but it comes with carrots, so I don't care. But for her, the experience is the point. Now, I imagine that there's a CFO somewhere in the McDonald's system who has at some point sort of said, this box costs 11p. Our margin is 40p. We can add 25% to our net margin by getting rid of the box. And if they did, my daughter doesn't want it anymore. Recognizing that efficiency is not the thing for which you are optimizing.
Yeah, very much agree with that. And I think like those, yeah, I think it's very exciting to start to get to a world where we can model those a little bit, where we can, or where like you can start to complement. I feel like what humans can do is in a way that almost no one else, that machines still can't, I think, is when you look at a location, when you sit, it's a curse once you start doing it. I was sitting in a restaurant last night, and my wife was saying, you know, you're obviously distracted. Like, why are you distracted? And it was a sushi place in Soho. I was like, well, they've obviously got a queuing system for drinks. So drinks they get delivered in the order they get put through. And I've just watched at 7 different tables where they delivered the 2 drinks at the table with about a 5-minute gap between them, because obviously other things, they were busy and different things had gone in the meantime. And I've just watched all 7 of those tables look incredibly irritated because they wanted to cheers with their drinks, and they couldn't. And you could see the frustration, and you could see each of them have a little moment with each other, which was, it won't show up in any efficiency data because it was a very efficient way of making drinks. The batching was very good, like the ordering made complete sense, but they'd annoyed everybody in that restaurant by doing it. And I think that's something where I'm not sure a machine will ever work out that was a problem. I think a really good manager will look at that location and within a couple of minutes go, hang on, the numbers look great, but this isn't why people are here. Like, people want to get there, you know, they've come here to have a couple of cocktails and some sushi before a show. They want their drinks at the same time as each other because they're going to go clink clink and have a sip, and then they're going to exchange cocktails and see what they taste like and all that sort of thing. And I think like that, we need humans to see those patterns, see we're not delivering it. Once you know that pattern exists, 100% you can tell an agent to go and see if you're not delivering it anymore, and you can say, hey, can you go and look at when these things are delivered? But you need that human to look at the experience of those people and say, what was it like being like, what was it like to go and have that experience, and how did it compare to what they had in mind when they sat down together here? I think that pairing can be really exciting and powerful, that humans can work out what it is, and then they can, you know, task the machine to go and find out how to find the pattern in the data.
It's incredibly culturally specific, that, because what you're speaking to there is the fact that in Northern European culture, having the drink together, whether that's a Coke, whether it's a beer, whether it's a cocktail, is culturally the start of your meal together. So you could, if you're at a tapas type place or a small platey place, bring them in a slightly more, well, we've cooked 3 of the, the smoked artichoke, we cooked 3 of the lamb. And so we put them on the tables as they come out. You can do that.
Really?
Because culturally, there's no expectation that that food comes out at once. And actually, you make part of the experience that sort of, oh, I wonder what's coming now kind of thing. You batch order together, and the randomness of the arrival is part of the fun. Whereas with drinks, there's an expectation that you all have your drink at once. And knowing the cultural expectation is something that really only, at least before you introduce the computer model and teach the computer model, only the human can know. And you can feel it. Humans are so good at feeling when an interaction has gone wrong.
Yes.
And it's such, there's a forgive me, this isn't about what you do, but it is sort of about what I do. I think this is really interesting. Do this next time. You know that thing, you're walking down the street and you see somebody you kind of vaguely know. You worked with them on the grad scheme 10 years ago, whatever it was. But you don't know each other well enough to stop. You'll do this really interesting thing where you walk down the road together and you'll both collude in pretense you haven't seen each other. And then you get about a foot away from one another. You go, oh, hi, mate, and you carry on going. Right? Next time, don't do that. Stare at them as you, from the moment you both see each other, just look at them. And it's really weird, right? The point is, we have incredibly strong cultural expectations about what social interactions look like. Humans are best left to that bit. And the more that you can automate out the stuff that, frankly, computers are better at, you can redeploy and make sure that you don't have half a table without a cocktail and half of them with, which to a Northern European is really weird.
I completely agree with that. Yeah. And I think like that, yeah, to come full circle, very much for me, right? It's like, oh no, humans aren't sort of the roles of humans in hospitality business are in no way at risk. It's just they're about to be able to stop doing things that they really didn't want to do to begin with. Yeah, it's fascinating. Are there any sort of go on?
I was just going to ask you a question. So you have clients across the sector. A very horizontal slice your client base, different sizes, different subsectors, different shapes of challenge. Where have you seen the most fundamental value created by using your systems?
I think the biggest thing I think is this slight shift in focus away from cost and towards driving sales. Like cost still matters, but I think like particularly without going too far into how hard the trading climate has become, because it has been, I think there's been this increased focus that like this isn't something that we can cost cut out of. It has to be something that we businesses have to trade out of this, and our customers are very much focused on we have to grow top line if this is going to work. There's been a lot of squeezing over the last 5 years and trying to get the last bits of efficiency out, and so I think a big part of our focus, the main part of our focus, is on labor. And I think the focus has been on labor as a tool for driving top line, and that can be it can be as simple as just understanding when actually opportunities are being missed, but also extending that out into experience and trying to understand when is the way that we're using labor. To your point about targeting earlier, like you can get very, very different at guest experience and sales profiles from the same pool of labor if you deploy it a little bit differently, and trying to find ways to say, where can we perhaps pull a little bit out and reallocate that and have that drive sales, and how can we keep control of costs while freeing up like good GMs and giving them the tooling to be able to experiment a little bit and say, actually, if I do put a little bit more labor here, a little bit more labor there, like I love Ben's example in the chat about the coffee store, where it's like giving the person responsible for the labor there, giving them the tools to say, actually, it's a really good bet, and it is a bet because you haven't done it before, so you're trying it, to try and put an extra person on for a day, for a day that has those characteristics, and see how many extra coffees you do sell, see how many. And you have to allow them that little bit of flexibility, that they know that if they do that once or twice and it doesn't pan out, that they're not going to then be sort of hauled up and sort of interrogated about it, that sort of, and helping to provide the tools to balance that, to say, let's be a little bit more aggressive, let's try and use labor as a tool to drive sales, while still staying on top of it. Like, you don't want to allow people to make the same mistake 10 times, but if they try something 9 times, if they try 10 things and 9 of them work and 1 of them doesn't, that's actually a really good outcome.
Yeah. And having the data to make those judgments accurately.
Completely.
So, you know, knowing when to put that thing on. I've just come from a meeting with one of my members, and she won't mind me sharing this. Fiona, the chief executive of Merlin, who's an incredibly impressive woman who runs, you know, Merlin's parks globally. They've just opened a bigger site in China. They're opening another one later in the year in China. Obviously, they've got, you know, everything they have in the UK. And she made a point, which is that they know the optimum weather for their parks is 27 degrees with a bit of cloud. Because nobody wants to go in 8 degrees in the cold, and any parent has had to do something similar to that. Equally, when it's 35 degrees, certainly if you've got as much Celt genetics in you as I have, to explode, 27 degrees is optimal. Now, they have clearly used data to arrive at that number. The ability to know when that day is coming and know that needs a different shape of resourcing than, you know, there's a bell curve presumably around. I imagine it's, you know, it won't be a total sort of standard distribution, because, you know, you'll still get somebody at 2 degrees. You presumably won't still get somebody at 60, 60 whatever degrees. But using the data, and equally with the, you know, pubs will tell you that as it gets hotter, people transfer their evening Friday night meal out from a restaurant to a pub. If it gets past a certain heat, they won't go to the pub because no one sits in a hot beer garden and no one sits inside in the sun. Completely. So again, knowing these data and being able to predict when you need to make, to your guest Ben's point, knowing when you need to, having the data, but also the flexibility to allow people to make these judgments.
And the combinations are getting so complicated. One of my favorite ones recently was a pub group, and looking at specific football fixtures as it combines with paydays and weather. And you have these fascinating dynamics where there are certain pubs which are where a group of fans go for those home games. And for them, weather and payday makes almost no difference, because they will go to the pub for those games no matter what. And then you have other pubs that on the surface look very, very similar, except game day combined with payday combined with weather makes a massive difference, because they're actually not the really hardcore fans that always go there.
Yeah. And
you look at once you get into the data, it starts to make complete sense. And like the machine can pull out those crazy combinations of things, but it's very, very, and like the GMs know some of it, but like you say, it's about showing them ahead of time that, like, look, these perfect storm things are happening together. And those combinations, as people get more and more choices, I think like deliveries also become a thing. As there are more and more options for what you do, they're getting harder and harder. Like, I think like the aggregators now and delivery for food in particular, there's now this whole new set of options, which is, well, when it does get really, really hot, actually I can, you know, get an air conditioner delivered the same day and then have, you know, beer and food delivered at 10 p.m. because it is 35 degrees and I don't want to leave.
Yeah.
The combinations are just getting harder and harder to predict.
Fascinating. And then, you know, to take another example of one of my members I was speaking to about use of data analytics rather than machine learning, perhaps, was housekeeping in large hotels, like big hotels. Obviously, housekeeping is a cost which people try to find ways of saving, because it's a housekeepers will be paid often well into the 30s a year, and it's a lot of cost to have, and it's a large amount of a hotel's cost. It's very analogous to shipping, where, you know, if you're a shipping company,
that's not what I was expecting you to say next.
bear with me, this is true. With a shipping company, you send your shipping container full of your stuff from China to, let's say, New York. You want it full on the return leg. And there are brokers whose entire job is maximizing the efficiency of the shipping lanes, right? So what you don't want is an empty leg at any point. And ideally, you want to minimize the amount of time a ship is at sea for the maximal amount of stuff that it's carrying, right? This is how cleaning hotels works. You want to maximize the number of rooms cleaned to the minimal amount of walking that they've done. So if there's a room in the east wing on level 2 needs cleaning, and there's a room in the west wing on level 4, and they're doing that and then they're back, massively inefficient, and they're spending their time walking, not cleaning. I was talking to a GM who has invested in a system that lets them basically shipping container these colleagues so that they are maximizing the amount of time that they're walking versus cleaning. And to do that, they've had to map the physical space of the hotel. They've had to provide metadata for all of the rooms, and they're building models which constrain people rationally within bits of the thing. Whereas before, to your example earlier about a drink, they were cleaning the rooms in the order that they came online, and they were zigzagging across the hotel.
And I think like bringing it back to sort of like where do we see the value coming from? Like I think what jumps out there as well is that like in any of like these businesses, any individual decision is quite small. Like, do I have this person start an hour later or an hour earlier? Like do I walk 3 rooms down or do I walk 1 room down? Like they're all very, very small individual decisions. But the cumulative impact of them, like once you look through to the bottom line, it drops down to like multiple points on EBITDA. But that's the thing that's been challenging up until now, that it's not really about going to somebody and saying, you know, bring your labor down by 2%. It's like, yes, you can do that, or bring your labor down by 10%. But like we've sort of over the last 10 years shaken out the opportunities that are available in terms of these broad brush changes. And now it is much more about what are the 5 actions that just GM can take today. There's 100 things they can do today that would probably be better, but there's probably 2 or 3 or 5 actions that will actually drop through and make a difference to the bottom line, or drop through and make a difference to the experience, whatever it is you're trying to drive. And I think that's the main thing, that it's like what agentic AI can do that the previous systems can't is go and work out for each of these people in a business that is making decisions, what are the 3 or 5 decisions that they're making today that's going to drive something that matters. And when you add that up over an organization that has 5 or 10,000 people, that's the difference between a meeting with shareholders at the end of the year that is a really quite a difficult conversation, and a very, very exciting meeting with shareholders where you get to say that you beat expectations. And I think that's the thing that's exciting and that I find very satisfying about this technology, that finally you have some tooling to be like, yes, you can get your arms around 5,000 decisions a day and try and make sure that they're good. I just don't think that was possible before.
No, agree.
Amazing. Not to interrupt you guys, but we are approaching the end of our session, and just inviting one more call for any questions from the audience. But I think Ben, Alan, that was an amazing conversation. If there's anything else you would like to add.
Ben, you go first.
Oh no, I mean, I guess like my closing for all of this is always like, I think particularly when it gets to AI and agentic AI, Alan made the point at the beginning, there's an awful lot of misuse of all of these words, and there's an awful lot of confusion out there around what's real, what isn't, what's actually possible, and what is slightly more in the realm of magic. And so as people are navigating that, like, obviously I'm always happy to talk about Sono and workforce and how agentic sits into workforce, because I spend a lot of my life doing that. But probably more importantly, if anybody, as people are navigating this world of how does sort of AI and agentic fit into hospitality, I'm genuinely always happy to meet for coffee, Zoom, like sort of any of those things, just to talk generally about the ecosystem and what's happening, and sort of try and be helpful in that way. So please do reach out. I'm sort of ben@getsona.com, and I'm sure Christina will share details afterwards, because it's a very rapidly evolving space. It's very exciting, and I'm always keen to chat to people that are navigating it.
And just from my perspective, I'll finish where I started similarly, which is that for me, the use of agentic AI is about turning complex data into actionable insights that managers and leaders can use to drive their decision making. One of the things I think that you have done very well, Ben, is to make that an accessible thing for people in a very people-driven sector to get on board with. So thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, and yeah, that's what we're trying to do. So hopefully we're going in the right direction.
Absolutely. We got a question from Lula, but I think we are going to be answering all of your questions on email, because I am conscious we are out of time. That's quite a complex question. Lula was asking main areas you think luxury hotels should focus on to maintain balance between experience and speed. Is that something, Ben, you'd like to do now, or do we want to take it?
I'd be very happy to have
Very
a long
short.
conversation, but a very short answer would be, because we've done quite a bit with luxury hotels. I think there's been our experience so far with luxury hotels have been, there are parts of the business that they're interesting businesses because they have this mixture of things that are quite simple and things that are incredibly complicated. And I think historically people have tried to apply the same solutions across all of them. And so I think where we've had the most success, and we'd be happy to talk about how we've done it, is trying to break the business into the pieces that are sort of broadly predictable and where sort of more traditional techniques can be applied without compromising experience. And then the places where experience is completely sacrosanct and actually it doesn't make any sense to be trying to apply things like traditional efficiency metrics or traditional efficiency approaches, and being really clear on what that breakdown is. I think we've generally found that actually if you break it up and if you're more modular in your approach to how you apply tools to it, you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls. And so things like breaking out sort of like what is your, like a classic example is the way you optimize housekeeping, to Alan's point, and the way that you optimize sort of front of house and check-in. Completely different in the luxury space, but people will try and apply the same models to both of those things, and that doesn't work. So breaking those things out, I think, makes a huge difference. And we've spent quite a lot of time sort of trying to do it. So very happy to chat through or to make introductions to other people that we've sort of helped do that. Because I think it's a really interesting one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, Alan, for joining us. This has been an amazing, amazing session. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for your questions. Some very interesting topics. As mentioned, we'll be sending out the summary and a recording. And if there's any introductions you would like us to make, absolutely reach out. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope to see you at our next session. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.